a few days ago I saw the Reddit post on the Terraria subreddit asking which modifier will be the best modifier for the melee character. And I was surprised how many players thought that violent modifier could be better than the Menancing modifier. So I want to make this video talking exactly how the melee speed affects all melee weapon types. So I have this chest here, and in it I have all melee weapon types. Let's begin with swords and spears. Here I have a set of accessories which will not affect my damage at all, but they all have Menancing modifier or the violent modifier. Let's begin with violent modifier and the titanium sword. Here is the DPS. I want you to pay attention to it. So with titanium sword we can reach like 270 damage per second. Now let's try the titanium sword with Menancing modifier. And if we don't count the crits, the damage will be actually lower than the violent modifier. That's because a violent modifier will affect the swing frequency of the swords and spears. So if you have swing only weapon, usually a violent modifier will achieve slightly better DPS than the Menancing one. Violent obsidian swordfish. And we can achieve around 360 damage per second. Let's try the Menancing modifier right now. And as we can see, the overall DPS will be greater with the Menancing modifier. So what happens when the weapon has a projectile? Here I have the Meowmer. Meowmer have both the projectiles which are affected by the gravity, which will be important, and the massive swing damage. Let's try it with the violent modifier first. Pay attention to the damage per second. We can achieve around 1600 damage now with the Menancing modifier. We can see that the damage will be actually lower, but it will be the different story if we measure the projectile only damage. Here I have violent modifiers, and we can reach 1100 damage per second. Now with the Menancing modifiers, the damage per second will be way higher. So what that means? That means that the melee speed modifier don't affect the use time of projectiles. Projectiles will always have the same fire rate with the violent modifier or with the Menancing modifier. So how does the violent modifier affect the projectiles? Let me show you this. Now we have the Menancing modifiers on, and we will keep the cursor on the platforms here. Alright, so we can hit the target dummy from here. Let's put the solar candle to mark this distance. We have the violent modifiers right now. Let's keep our cursor at the platforms and let's see what happens. Alright, so we can hit him from around here. That's the difference. The melee speed will affect the projectile's velocity. Another issue with the violent modifier is that the melee speed will actually be way better than the pure damage modifiers, but in Terraria we have the invisibility frames. How does it work? When the enemy is struck by the piercing damage, and the Meowmer projectiles are piercing, as you can see, the struck enemy will receive a really short time of invisibility. In this state, the enemy will not receive any damage other than the piercing damage for really short amount of time, but that amount is enough to stop a few swings from your weapon. If the invisibility frames would not be real, then I should hit this dummy twice. And I hit him only once, even though my sword was hitting the dummy. If we turn into auto swing, some of these swings will hit the dummy, but a major part of them will actually not deal any damage to it. That's the main reason why violent modifier isn't as good as it could be. Now let's try other melee weapons. Let's try the boomerangs. Right now we have the violent modifiers on and the paladin's hammer. Let's see. Okay, so we can hit the dummy from here, and our damage per second is around 480. Let's mark this distance, and let's put the Menancing modifier. As you can see, we can't hit the dummy no longer. That's because the melee speed will affect the range of rest of the melee weapons that are not swords or spears. Let's try it once again with the possessed hatchet. I have the violent modifiers on. Okay, so with hatchet we can hit the dummy from here. Keep in mind I have the violent modifiers on. Let's mark this distance and let's put the Menancing modifiers. And I can't hit him no longer. However, my DPS will be greater. It will be the same story with yo-yos, with flails and with unique melee weapons. So let me show you this really quick. The Eye of Cthulhu with violent modifiers can reach the dummy from here and has around 900 damage per second. The Menancing Eye of Cthulhu will not be able to reach the target dummy from the same spot as the violent modifiers could, but its damage per second will be higher. The Violent Dao of Pao can reach the dummy from here. Menancing Dao of Pao will not be able to do that. However, its DPS will be much greater with the Menancing modifiers. Same story with the guillotines. They can reach him from here. And with the Menancing, they can't. Now for the unique melee weapons. We have the vampire knives. Here are the violent vampire knives. And take a look at this range. So with violent modifiers we can hit dummy from here. Let's put the Menancing modifiers. And we can't hit the dummy no longer. Interesting thing is the lance. Let's use the lance with the Menancing modifiers. And we can hit the dummy from here. And now let's look at the violent lance and see what happens. The lance will place itself farther from the player, increasing the weapon's range. Same story with the solar eruption. We have the violent modifiers right now. We can hit the dummy from here, and with the Menancing we can't. The Daybreak is the projectile based weapon and it's affected by gravity, so its velocity will be greater with the violent modifier, which will make the Daybreak easier to use as it will travel faster. I have the violent modifiers on right now. Let's keep our cursor at the platforms and we can hit the dummy from here. Our damage per second is around 650. Let's put the Menancing modifiers and see what happens. We have the cursor at the exactly same spot and we can't hit the dummy no longer, but if we will get closer then we can see that our DPS is way higher with Menancing modifiers. So what that means? That means that type of melee weapon which isn't the sword or the spear will be affected by the melee speed in the same way, which is this weapon's range will be greater. And that's it. The melee speed will not affect the attack speed of the weapon. the damage will not be changed in any way with the violent modifier. Which means that Menancing is the go-to modifier for all melee weapons other than the swords or spears that damage enemy with only its swings, or have the non-piercing projectiles. But as we well know, there is no swords in the late game that have non-piercing projectiles. That's all from me. I hope you've learned something from this video. Thank you very much. See ya.